Hello, I'm Susan Patricelli-Regan, and this is Connecticut Valley Views with my guest today, Sal Luciano, who is the president of the Connecticut AFL CIO. Just for me to start, Sal, I'm going to explain that the AFL CIO is a federation of hundreds of local unions representing more than 220,000 workers in the private sector, public sector, and building trades. So, Sal, given the wide diversity of your members and job segments, how have your unions dealt with the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis?
The COVID-19 crisis really are three crises. It's the pandemic, it's the economic downturn that occurred, and it also kind of pointed out to the systemic racism, and I think the three are interconnected. So I'll start with COVID-19. In terms of the demographics, if you got COVID-19 in Connecticut, you were likely white, you were likely in a convalescent home. If you were brown or black and got COVID, you were likely working one or two jobs, or in many cases, you were taking care of the elderly white people in the convalescent home. So it really showed who got it and why they got it. And the mortality for African Americans and brown people were about twice that of white people when they get it. And again, showing the disparities in health access that we have in this country and in this state. Those are the people who worked. And then those who didn't work, again, the disparity was with brown and black people. 40% of the jobs that earned about $40,000 or less were wiped out in the 2 months of the COVID pandemic. And those lower paid jobs are mostly held by black and brown people, white people also. And just ironically in that time, in the months between roughly March 17th and June 17th, at the same time, those people were losing their jobs in 40 million across the nation. Billionaires earned $500 billion in that same period of time, again showing the disparity and wealth inequality and who suffered and who did not during this pandemic. And then, I guess, thirdly, the racial piece, we saw not just what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, but we also saw the disparity that exists in healthcare, in education. You could predict a child's success based on their zip code. It's that strong of a correlation.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you look at this then, if one were to take any benefit or any learning curve out of this, is that the virus has made the dynamics of what you've just explained more clearly visible to everyone, and that if it had not happened, this would not be so evident?
Yes, I think we had problems to begin with, but this pulled the curtain back to your point, Susan, to show exactly how bad the wealth inequality is and how bad structural racism is in this country. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. So when you're talking about, and thank you for that, with regard to the economic impact and the various segments and so forth, give us a sense of which ones were most impacted relative to, let's say, truck drivers or which segments do you think? Was it the health workers?
Yes. The people who were in the beginning, if you can recall, I mean, we knew about this in January. We knew what was happening in Wuhan, but in March we were still unprepared. And so the people who got hit the worst were the bus drivers who didn't even have masks. We're still allowing people to come through the front door and the back door of the bus, and shuttle drivers that don't have a back door of the bus. CNAs who were taking care of the elderly, almost all brown and black employees, the unionized and non-unionized grocery workers, nurses, of course, all sorts of healthcare, and even fast food workers. It's interesting to note that the people who last year many said weren't deserving of $15 an hour, were the very people who are keeping the state moving.
I would agree with you. Yes, yes, yes. I would agree with you.
In correction officers, the prisons and jails are a place where there is no social distancing. They are literally, the prisoners are literally on top of each other. There is no way to socially distance. Not only in at least in some of these cases, if you were smart enough to have a mask, you were wearing a mask, or if you can get one, you were wearing it. Corrections had an even strange quirk. They were not providing correction officers with masks, nor were they allowing the correction officers to wear masks even if they brought it from home.
Okay, so let me just ask you right there. They were not allowed, they were not provided. Who would it have been the correct provider to those people?
So usually the buck stops with the commissioner. And the commissioner isn't there anymore. I don't know if the two things are related.
Okay.
Yes. So I think it was hard for Connecticut to be as prepared, given the fact that there was no national stockpile of masks, number one. And then number two, when it was clear that they were badly needed in New York and in Connecticut, often Connecticut was actually bidding for masks and being outbidded by the federal government.
Yes.
So it was very strange situation where PPE, there was no national stockpile. We allowed the creation of those to be outsourced. China made most of those masks until recently in the War Powers
Isn't that
Act.
ironic? That's ironic, isn't it?
It's ironic. And the fact that the federal government were outbidding the states for these masks, and so early on you couldn't get them. But there was no reason why the correction officers who had masks were not early on allowed to use it themselves. The other thing with correction officers that's interesting is because many got sick and they were making them come in for 2 shifts. So they would work 2 shifts and they would sleep either at a hotel because they were afraid of giving it to their family, or at home exposing their family. But then when they got COVID-19 and they filed workers' comp forms, they were denied.
Really?
Yes, they are.
Because have all of these things been corrected? Does everybody have the PPE stuff they need? Do they have more in case it comes back in the fall? And have they been allowed now, obviously been given the freedom to do that? Has all of that been corrected?
I would say no. I would say there's still, the bus drivers as of a couple weeks ago were given 1 mask per week. That's not recommended. And also still in some hospitals, the N95 mask, which in normal situations, when you leave the room, you discard it and then you put on another one so that you're not infecting other people.
Right.
Still, there's a shortage, so that in some cases, people are wearing 1 mask for an entire day, and nurses are to the point where they won't drink, they won't eat anything for their entire shift because they're afraid of touching their mask and they're afraid of infecting themselves with COVID-19. So they have it for crisis mode, but they don't have it enough for the way they're normally supposed to use them.
All right. Well, let me just take this moment then to thank all of your workers, all of the people who have been impacted, who have been so brave. And I just want you to comment on could you highlight the ones that you feel have actually put themselves out the most? Is it the truck drivers who kept the food going, get the deliveries going? I mean, where would you put some gold stars?
I would put gold stars with fast food workers, the CNAs who really are with this, because it's just a shame how many convalescent homes were rife with the coronavirus. The nurses and doctors, of course, the people who stock the shelves and who ring our food at the cash registers, bus drivers, all of those people, correction officers, of course, the police and firefighters who are exposed. All of those people really were heroes and really we did hearts and we banged pots and pans, and sometimes they would do the flyover with the planes. But we really have not treated them well in terms of if they got sick. We did not do a workers' comp presumption for them. And so we called them heroes, but we didn't really treat them like heroes.
Well, I think it's been the habit and the custom to thank the military for their service, and perhaps we start thanking these folks for their ongoing efforts and bravery. It's actually bravery, really.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Now, do you feel, how do you feel Connecticut's doing at reopening businesses? Do you feel it's going in the right direction? Are we doing it at the right speed? Do you think we're following the right way to do it? Do you feel that do you feel we have the leadership has given us direction so that everybody's on the same page?
I have to say, given the fact that Connecticut has the lowest amount of coronavirus infections currently, that absolutely good leadership. If you recall, I believe the state shut down March 17th, which is either the same day or the day after New York City did. And you remember the crisis New York City was going through. Mm-hmm. Their news were at full capacity. The pictures of the bodies in the
yes.
refrigerator trucks were just appalling. You remember that, and so the fact that Connecticut locked down before we became like New York was, I think, key in helping us, and the fact that there were people who wanted to reopen sooner. I get that. The economy was hurt. I get that. But if you look at other places that opened too soon, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, they are having record numbers of COVID positives that they had in April. So they're actually going through two crises. They went through one, and now through another one. And so I think it shows that Connecticut was smart not to reopen too early.
Okay, good. Well, all right. So that's a positive note. All right, I'm going to read from a May 18th, 2020. It's an online article published by the Republican American. It stated that you said that CBAC unions agreed to concessions in 2009, 2011, 2017 that have saved the state billions of dollars at the cost of unionized workers. The possibility, is there any possibility, do you think, that the unions will agree to the upcoming very close givebacks again, or not reduction in salaries, but not taking salary increases? Do you see any mediation on that at all?
I see two problems with that. One, if you look at the 2009, but it started in 2010, that had a 1-year wage freeze. The 2011 had a 2-year wage freeze, and the 2017 concessions, which saved $24 billion, or will save $24 billion over the next 20 years, has already saved almost $2 billion. That had 3 wage freezes. So if you look at that in a 10-year span, you'll see that state employees had 6 of 10 years with a wage freeze. If they were to give this one back, it would be 7 wage freezes in 10 years. They're asking from people like correction officers who work 16-hour shifts during the pandemic. You're asking that of DCF social workers who knocked on doors during the pandemic. You're asking that of the nurses who took care of COVID patients. And you're asking that of people who took care of those in facilities like Southbury Training School. So it's kind of difficult because you're asking the people who expose their lives and who expose their families' lives to the virus, and then to ask them to forego a raise. And if they do, it would be the 7th year without a raise in a decade.
Some folks would say, and I agree, there's been a lot of give back and a lot of agreement on the union's part. Do you see the fact, though, that there could be less jobs available if we can't get our economic status in a better view, where businesses will close and the jobs won't be there and then people will be out of work? I mean, would it not be better to perhaps one more time, because of this special situation, This is different from all the others. One time to perhaps save jobs so that there are jobs to actually go back to in the future.
I'm not exactly sure how them not getting raises would save jobs. I do understand, and I've heard people say, well, you know, some people have no jobs and state employees are getting raises. That isn't fair. I don't know how to
transfer.
I don't know how that equates, because the concerns, if you look back in 2008, when working people did not cause this financial crisis, when it was caused by the banks and by mortgages that were sloppily given to people who they knew could not afford them. If you look at that situation, you could see that the response was a tepid response. It was not very courageous. And so it took 10 years to bounce back. And when I look at this scenario now, we can't afford another 10 years. We can't be so timid as we were in 2018 because we can't afford another 10 years. And the answer, quite frankly, is the same answer that we had, or that we could have had in 08 and 09, and that is the federal government. The federal government took a first step. I think it was helpful. I think it made it so that many people, look, most Americans, they don't have enough money to afford an emergency bill.
$500 in the savings account department.
And so the whole idea behind giving them unemployment insurance plus $600 was not only to help them stay afloat, but it was also to help the economy. The $1,200 was not just so they wouldn't go belly up, but it was so that they could keep spending and help the economy.
Yes.
So to not give raises or to not put money, to try to do this with austerity will cut jobs. And so therefore, I think it's imperative that the bill that the Congress passed, the HEROES Act, that also give money to states and to towns, I believe that it's imperative that that gets passed. I know Mitch McConnell doesn't like it in its current form, but he's also getting pressure because if Connecticut is doing bad financially, it's at least towards the middle of the pack because we have a rainy day fund. Kentucky, Mitch McConnell is a senator from, Kentucky is the third poorest state right now. And so he's re-election this year, and there's a lot of pressure on him to pass something that will help the states and the cities weather this economic crisis.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up that, the rainy day fund, because it's the same article by Paul Hughes. It said that the state is facing a deficit. This is estimated as high as $958.5 million for a current 2020 fiscal year that ends June 30th, and $2.3 billion for the upcoming 2021 fiscal year because of the projected revenue losses resulting from this virus. So the 2-year total surpasses the state's $2.5 billion budget reserve fund. So again, I'm not going to be redundant by asking you the question again, but I guess it's a thought going forward. Can we one more time come to some conclusion? But let me move on now here to two things that are on your website. I noticed, and they are, and you mentioned them at the beginning. There's a resolution on police accountability, systemic racism, and the AFL CIO has asked Representative Themis Clerides to demand Fishbein's resignation over a racist tweet. Could you kind of expand on those 2 points?
Sure. So let me first say that the police have just an unbelievable, difficult job. They are usually the be-all and end-all to many problems the society has not tackled. So if you have a brother who's experiencing mental health problems and acting a little bit violent and you can't control them, you call the police. And then you wonder why sometimes bad things happen, because police are just not made to handle those kinds of situations. So having said that, I think, and having said that there is systemic racism, I believe it's important to finally take a look at, no matter how pure the policeman is, there is a history with the police of police being used to oppress Black and brown people. Clearly in the South, the police came from, morphed from people who basically were meant to keep slaves on the plantation through Jim Crow, where police actually worked with the KKK to humiliate and to oppress black and brown people. And so when you put on that uniform, no matter how pure you are as a policeman, there is a history of that being used to oppress minorities. It's hard to explain if you are not black, the kind of anxiety you feel when you're pulled over, even for something as minor as a traffic signal that is working.
Mm-hmm.
And the police really can help in this situation, because when they show up protecting people who are peacefully protesting, which they have a constitutional right to do, when they kneel with the protesters, when they're with the protesters, they're part of the community. When they show up dressed in shields, dressed in helmets,
mm-hmm.
batons,
Mm-hmm.
then just their very presence escalates the situation. They don't become us, they become them.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mike Lawler said in the newspaper recently, when you dress like a gladiator,
Yeah.
like a gladiator. And so there are things that we need, that I think if we look at, we can really use to make the police really part of the community. When I was a kid, if you remember the Watts riots,
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid, I was taken aback because they used tanks to try to keep African Americans in their neighborhoods. Tanks. And so, really, do we need that level of militarism against our own citizens, against our own people? The June 1st scenario, where peaceful protesters were militarily rubber bullets and tear gas.
Yes.
They were pushed aside, exercising their constitutional rights, so that the president could go across the street and do that stunt with the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that level of military might used against citizens of the United States since the federal bombing of the coal miner strikes back in Baird Mountain, and I think 150 years ago.
Yes.
I thought that kind of attacks against our own citizens could not happen in my lifetime, and I did that on June 1st.
I can say, just as a person probably brought up under a very strict father, having had, I grew up in West Hartford, very strict father, that anytime I've seen policemen, I don't want to do anything wrong. So I myself personally, I certainly am not black. I'm a white woman. However, I see the uniform and I immediately want to cooperate. I don't want to fight them. And so I think it does come from how it is instilled in you to behave yourself. So I think in my case, it was to respect authority. Perhaps in the racial terms, it is to have fear. So mine is kind of out of respect. That's what I was taught. You do what you're told. And the other is out of fear. That has to be changed. We have to get to something in the middle. We don't want them to be, well, there's a fear and a respect is close, but I think we need to change that. And as you said, maybe correction on to have a different perspective on it. And go ahead.
I have two daughters, and I've never worried because they're white. I've never had to have a conversation with them about how to behave at police.
Yes.
But if I'm African American, if they were black, then I wouldn't have that conversation. And I think that said so that white people understand that there is white privilege, and that's an
right. Okay, so what about this racism comment by Fishburne, and that you're asking Themis to ask for his resignation?
This is probably the most outrageous thing that he said. He's also had a couple of other comments, a couple that I've actually witnessed in a hearing room, but this one, I think, if you're not looting, you're not black. I think is above the pale, and I know that he meant it in part to spoof Joe Biden, who said if you don't vote for then
right.
if you vote for Trump, then you're not black.
Yes.
But I think there was another way he could have done it that wasn't as racist as that comment. You're not looting at all.
So would you still look for his resignation? You feel that was totally out of line?
I think it's totally out of line. He needs to look in his heart. I mean, I think he also appreciates, maybe in hindsight, how wrong he was, because I think he joined his own censure.
So what about an apology? Might that help?
If it's sincere, I think it would help.
Okay. All right. Well, good. All right. Well, let's end on that good note. It certainly is always a pleasure to speak with you, Sal. I appreciate your candidness. I certainly appreciate your leadership of your membership union. I think it's been very constructive. We, again, applaud all of your members for their bravery. This has actually been a war, and it's an ongoing war. Let's not hope it's a Vietnam 10-year war. Let's hope we get this thing over with. But I would like to give your website for people to follow along. It is ctaflcio.org. And I'd like to remind our viewers to watch all of our programs on ctvalleyviews.com. This is Susan Patricelli-Regan. Thank you for joining me with my guest today, Sal Luciano. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care.